Why do ADHD entrepreneurs always leave things to the last minute? Procrastinate. Why do we have extremely busy schedules? Why are things always urgent? Well, today I've got Dr. William Dodson. He's very nice to come back again to the podcast. He's a board certified adult psychiatrist who was one of the first practitioners to specialize in adults with ADHD 25 years ago. He was named a Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association in 2012 for his work with adult ADHD. Dr. Dodson, thank you for coming back.
A pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I've had a lot of great feedback from our conversations, especially about the ADHD nervous system, the interest-based nervous system, and you have your acronym NECUP. So for us to get engaged, correct me if I got the phraseology incorrect here, but for us to get engaged, it's got to be novel, interesting, competitive, urgent, or passion related. And I've noticed with myself and a lot of other ADHD entrepreneurs I work with, we seem to default to the urgency side of things. I understand the stuff that's not really important to us or not important, it's important to others. We seem to use urgency as a tool to get those done. Tasks and projects have very little interest to us. But even stuff I'm noticing lately, I got a lot of interest and I can't wait to get going. I still lead towards waiting for that urgency timeline to kick in. And how is it true that maybe the ADHD brain prefers the urgency side of the nervous system, or is it just the way we're wired or doing something different?
Well, it's the default. If you weren't able to get started, then it goes down to the wire, down to the deadline. The things that you were able to get engaged with and get done, you don't notice because they got done.
Right.
It's the other ones that nag you for weeks, that take all the fun out of life, all the joy because it's hanging over you. So it's urgency just ends up being the last thing. It becomes urgent because it has to be done right now.
Okay. Like for me right now, I've changed the way my company is structured. It's changed how I'm going to do things, so I can have more time to do things I'm interested in and want to do. And my stress level is reduced by the extra work that's being done, and I'm separating myself from the engineering side. Because I used to be able, I got lots to do. Up I go. I can get up at any times in the morning and go, go, go. But now it's like, wait a minute. I got some stuff to do. It's interesting, but it's not pressing. So I can lay here for another half hour or drink my coffee a little longer. But knowing what I know now, that just means sooner or later, I'm going to get to the end where it will become urgent. And that's kind of bothersome to me. I know what I know, but I can't get that part of it done. So do you have any insights on that?
Well, urgency is sort of the flip side of procrastination, which is probably the most impairing part of ADHD in terms of performance and efficiency in life. Because we can't get started. We were talking, Russ Barkley, one of his famous quotes is, ADHD is not a problem of knowing what to do, it's a problem of doing what you know.
Right.
It's getting started. That's the big problem. Once you're started, once you're able to overcome that inertia, then those other five factors, interest, challenge, novelty, urgency, and passion, those are the things that help you stay and get engaged and stay engaged. What is not on that list are the two things that neurotypical people use, importance and rewards or consequences.
Oh, rewards, that's right. Can you expand on those two, please?
Sure. A person with who doesn't have ADHD, neurotypical people, they're able to get engaged, get access to their abilities, and then stick with tasks on the basis of two things. It's important, and it doesn't even have to be important to them. It can be important to their boss, to their spouse, to something abstract like their reputation or their career.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there's a reward for doing it. There's a payoff, there's money, there's prestige, there's being able to check something off the list. or there are consequences, that's the reverse, punishments or whatever, for not getting it done. So those are the two things that generally the other 90% of the population use. Being interested or challenged is nice, it's helpful, but not required for people with a neurotypical nervous system. If you have somebody with an ADHD style nervous system, look back over your life. Can you remember a single time in which the importance of the task all by itself has ever actually helped you? Or has it just been a nag?
For other people, for sure. I think you can describe most of my life with that. But I'm also struggling. Things I know it's important to me, I struggle with as well.
Yeah. And important, you know what's important. You like rewards, you don't like punishments. It's just that they're useless to people with ADHD. They don't lead anywhere. They just nag you. This is so important. It's due at the end of the week, and I can't get started. And well, again, it gets down to procrastination. And usually, if you've been procrastinating, but the only thing that really has a chance of overcoming it is that sense of urgency right at the bleeding deadline.
Right.
I mean, it was interesting for the last 3 weeks, but that didn't help you. It was challenging, but that didn't get you started. It's the urgency that has some chance of overcoming that inertia. Sometimes, in fact, fairly commonly, even that sense of urgency is not enough to get you moving. And so you miss deadlines. You worry about getting a reputation of being unreliable, that you don't come through in a clutch or stuff like that. So while urgency does work finally, usually, it doesn't work all the time. And so we're still coming back to why were we procrastinating to begin with?
So
what was keeping us from getting started?
So this is what this is actually is all about, is overcoming that inertia to get started. That's what the ADHD and the interest-based nervous system is about.
Right.
So if it's important for the neurotypical, they can get over that inertia to get started. Right. So it's really about procrastination and getting started.
Right.
That changes this for me. So this is very interesting.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to get started if it's not urgent?
Well, there are lots of reasons, and they're much the same whether you have a neurotypical nervous system or an ADHD nervous system. Sometimes it's that you don't know how to get started. You don't know where to begin. Let's go back to that notion of people with ADHD don't do importance and rewards very well. When they know what they are, they just can't use them. So say you have a task, and there are several hundred different ways that you could get started, but you can't really evaluate them. If one is not any better, not more important to somebody else, or the reward doesn't matter to you that much and what you're going to get out of doing it, all the different places to start look exactly the same. They're all shades of gray. Right. So this is where people get caught in overthinking. They go through all the different possibilities over and over and over, hoping that one will pop out and you can use that one to get started. And again, if you don't have that neurologic predisposition to, that makes one option much better than all the others, then you tend to spin your wheels. So that's one thing.
So that's an executive functioning difference right there, wouldn't it? Yes, no?
I'm not a real fan of executive function deficit theory.
All right, that's a different day.
Yeah. For instance,
go ahead.
Let me ask you a question, and the people who are listening to this can answer it for themselves. Look back over your entire life. If you've been able to get engaged and stay engaged with literally any task of your life, have you ever found anything you could not do? How would you answer that?
No, if I can do it, I just do it differently. And that's
Yeah.
why I think with the executive functioning, I think it's more of a difference than a disorder.
The whole point is just about everybody says it's something to the effect of, if I can
If,
get engaged, if I can get started and stay
yeah,
engaged,
yeah,
I can do just about anything. Well, all of a sudden that means that people don't have executive functions. It's situational. If the situation's right and I can get started, then I can do anything. That means there aren't people with ADHD don't have executive function deficits. I mean, if you look at the research, fewer than half of people with ADHD have an impairing executive function deficit. So
mhm,
how can you have a theory of the whole, beast of ADHD that fewer than half of people have?
right.
So that's why executive function deficit um,
That's a good point.
has never really um, made sense to me. It's
So,
again, it's access. Do Can you get started? Can you get started, get access to your abilities, and stick with it?
right. So let's
And
get
that
back
is
to that.
situation.
So your last point was overthinking of too many options. And this is where I feel sometimes I get overwhelmed because there's just too many options.
Right. So, how do you get around that? If your
Right.
nervous system just doesn't do importance and rewards, um, and that is, you go back to the ending of things. When we're working, say, with a kid in school, and we're doing an individualized educational program, one thing that we put in every IEP is a requirement that if there is a major production, a paper or a project or something like that, the teacher has to show the student a paper or a project that got an A last year. So
Oh,
the patient, so the person can actually see what an A looks like, because they can't imagine for themselves. Once they know what that looks like, they can then work backwards from the end point, from the finish line, from the product, to see where to begin to get to the end. So
oh
people
my God.
who are neurotypical start at the beginning and go to the end. People with ADHD start at the end and go to the beginning. They sort of pass each other in the middle.
It's reverse engineering.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
So
this is
again, it's that's that's one of the ways in which you can overcome the fact that if you're starting from the beginning and everything is just a shade of gray, that you're never going to be able to overcome that. It's neurological.
this is
But you've got to,
phenomenal because like you just kind of explained how when I went into the engineering field after graduation, I thought it's probably a lot of the influence of my father that most engineers are arrogant people and they don't listen. So I went and talked to the trades, I talked to the mechanics, and I learned from them.
Mhm.
But what I just heard from you, because even if I go to a unique construction site problem, I've always asked them, how do you normally do it?
All right,
But it was me figuring out the end result to make it work backwards.
exactly.
Shit.
You can edit that out.
Well, that's
So
just
again, it's
another, yeah. And I think a lot of my buddies are ADHD entrepreneurs. That's what we're doing. We figure out how it looked like, and then with that we do improvements. So that's really cool. So that's
yeah,
how you're
yeah.
talking
You have
about
to have a
working from
vision of
the
where you're
start.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, what it does is it narrows down from 1,000 options down to one.
Right.
And so you don't spin your wheels, you don't go off on, down rabbit holes and things like that. You know where you're going, you know where you're going to end up. Um, Other thing is you have to be honest with yourself about whether you really want the outcome.
Oh, okay. Yes.
What a lot of people want is they want the outcome rather than the process. What we
Hmm.
really want is to have done our taxes. We don't want to do our taxes. We want to have it behind us.
Right.
And so it's very hard to get started on something you don't really want to do. So that's something where you have to really be honest with yourself. And if it's something you really don't want to do, guess what? You don't get around to doing it.
Hmm.
Another thing that you have to be honest with yourself about is, are you afraid of failing? That
Hmm.
if I get started, then it's highly likely I'll fail. Because, again, I know when people come in to see me as a doctor, therapist, or whatever, they've tried everything they can think of. People don't come in for treatment or to get on medications until they have tried literally everything else they can think of, and it has failed. It has not worked. And so most people with ADHD, when they actually decide, I need to do something about this, it's ruining my life, they come in um, with absolutely no morale at all, because everything they've tried has failed.
Yeah.
And so they expect, okay, this is going to fail too, because everything else has. And so for a lot of people, especially people who have that rejection sensitivity dysphoria stuff, where one of the big triggers is failing or falling short, a lot of times, again, they want to have done it. They want that assurance that everything worked out okay. But the thing is, they don't have that. They're afraid that if I get started, I'll fail. If I don't get started, then I haven't really failed. It's still out there in the possible future.
It's a different procrastination, a different reason for procrastinating.
Right. Again, it's because you don't think you're going to be successful.
Right.
Or you're afraid you're not going to be. And so these are, types of things where you really have to be honest with yourself. This, by the way, is where ADHD groups are very helpful. Is that you're sitting in a group with 8 or 10 other people who are going through the exact same stuff that you are, and they can help you work through all of these different impediments to ever getting started. So again, there's that assumption of, if I know what to do, then what's keeping me from doing it? Well, there are a lot of things that keep you from doing it. And one of the biggest ones is a fear of falling short.
How is that different than failure?
Well, same thing.
Okay.
Just a nicer way of putting it.
So having that said, the fear of falling short, can that be like high achievers, growth mindset entrepreneurs? Do you think the fear of failing short is probably one of the, being a high achiever, I want to succeed on all the goals I set. And if I'm afraid of failing short, then that would be another reason not to start.
Right.
Okay.
Because it's so much more painful for people with ADHD than it is for neurotypical people. Now, nobody likes it, but it is several orders of magnitude more painful for people with ADHD because of the rejection sensitivity, because of that life history of not being able to do what you're able to do.
Thank you for the life history. So the past exposure and negativity, but at the same time too, us feeling emotions a lot more intensely than some others would add to that.
ADHD experience their lives much more intensely, much more passionately than neurotypical people do. I mean, that's why everywhere in the world except the United States, a fourth cardinal criteria of ADHD is now emotional dysregulation. I finally started moving in the direction of saying it's more than just performance. It's the ability to control the intensity of our emotional lives. People with ADHD usually have the executive functional abilities to manage their emotions. It's just that their emotions overwhelm those abilities.
Yeah. And I think
it's so much more intense.
Right. And I think that's a very subtle thing for the listeners to understand here, that the emotional dysregulation is not necessarily you don't know what to do. It's that overwhelming intensity. And like you said, the passion, we feel more passion than probably some others with relation to emotions. So it's not a you problem. It's in a way, it's a brain problem. And that overwhelming, it's overwhelming to deal with those emotions, especially if they're complicated. If you want to throw in your RSD in there, well, what the hell? Sometimes you just like either you fight or flight, right?
Yeah. And then again, the whole meaning of the word dysphoria is that it's unbearable. It's literally Greek for unbearable. Nobody likes failure, nobody likes rejection, all that other stuff. But for people with ADHD, it's a totally different critter. It is much more intense and severe for people with ADHD than it is for the average neurotypical person on the street. Another thing that you pointed out is that people with ADHD tend to set the bar way too high. These are the perfectionistic people with ADHD. And that's how they dealt with their rejection sensitivity, is they've never failed. I mean, they are perfectionists, and they are always above reproach. But the trouble is that sometimes they set the bar at an unattainable level.
Correct. Guilty.
And so consequently, on some level, they know if I get started, I am going to fall short. And the whole notion of good enough, somewhat
No
rare
such
in
thing.
people.
Yeah, that 80% rule has been a struggle for me to deal with. So I want to go back to you said we set the bar too high. Now, that's not an ADHD thing.
No.
That's more about the way we were conditioned, constant failures in other people's mind, even though we weren't failing. It's just didn't measure up to their norms or their expectations. So that's more of a traumatic or I forget the actual word, but I'm going to use the term like traumatic events or if you're constantly told you suck, well, I want to avoid sucking again, so I'm going to make sure that I got it half right this time. I got to make it 200% right and work hard. And then, and for me, it didn't matter. Even though I achieved what they wanted, it was still never enough. So that bar just keeps, but that's more of a mental, that's what your brain developing protective mechanisms for you as well, subconscious.
Well, or just like Michael Jelenick's work, that by the time a child is in the third grade of school, that child has heard 20,000 additional negative or corrective messages in school alone. We're not even counting home or the playground or whatever. Makima's work, that in the third grade, 70% of children with ADHD do not have a single friend. They've been rejected 100%. So people with ADHD come in having been set up to fail. I mean, our school system is not designed for people with ADHD.
No, even the corporate world isn't either.
Excuse me?
Even the corporate world is not set up for that.
Nothing in the world is.
Yeah.
Again, everything's built on performance, being able to stand and deliver right now. And again, what are most jobs?
Yeah.
But you're being paid to do what somebody else thinks is important to them.
Yeah.
What a setup. Which is why so many people with ADHD end up being entrepreneurs, is at least they're working for themselves. They haven't been set up, where they're working according to somebody else's priorities.
Yeah. And it's for me to create an environment that I'd be accepted in as well.
No, it's your environment.
Yeah. Even though at times we sabotage that by creating rules that make us fail, but that's a different, that's an entrepreneurial thing. It's a whole different conversation. Yeah. But I want to end with this point that you just made. The world is performance-based. And I find, just based on what you said, I just had this impulsive thought. If the world was set for, it was results-based, you were, you won with results. The ADHD world, we would thrive on there. Tell me what you need to do, and let me do it how I do it. And you don't measure me in between. I'll give you the results. That's the result. I'll thrive on that. Sorry?
How you do it doesn't matter, just as long as it gets done.
But that's the most times I get in trouble, is how I do it. Because it didn't meet up on the performance side. I got the results, but the how is always challenged because it's not linear.
If you look at people who have an ADHD style nervous system, who have been very successful in the world of business, the world of work, you see the same pattern over and over and over again. And that is that the person with ADHD has what we call an implementer, finisher, partner.
Yes.
The person with ADHD is a world-class problem solver. They will come up with the solutions that nobody else would ever think of. The thing is that once they've solved the problem, it has no more interest, challenge, or novelty. Yeah. And so that's why people with ADHD have 2 or 3 great new ideas every day, virtually none of which actually get implemented. So what people with ADHD need is a partner who isn't ADHD, who would have never come up with the solution in a million years, but if shown what to do, will implement on a world-class basis.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bill Gates, he's pretty public with the fact that he's ADHD now, but he had Paul Allen and then Steve Ballmer, who did all of the implementation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steve
Yeah.
Jobs and Steve
Yep.
Wozniak. They knew what their limitations were, and they didn't demand of themselves to do something that they weren't any good at, which was implementation of something they'd already figured out.
Yeah. And like Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach has this concept. You got the person who makes it up. You need the people that make it real. And then you need the people to make it recur. And a lot of the visionary entrepreneurs, and I find a lot of our ADHD are in the make it up thing. And we need that make it real person. If not, it gets very frustrating and annoying and things get out later or not 100%, sorry, 80%.
And then they sell out before they do the make it recur part.
Correct.
They're serial entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So
they do have the vision.
Right. They have the vision, but to overcome that inertia of ADHD, which is the procrastinations, they got people on their team to get them started. So it's actually not a problem of not knowing what to do. It's getting started. Because it can be overwhelming. We've got too many options. And the one thing you said was, let's get a reference for what it looks like down the road. And we start reverse engineering back. And I think there's two questions that was very important that we must assess. Like, we got so many ideas, we got so many options, but just simply asking, do I really want this outcome, will help you decide if it's something you want to do or not. That's helped me a lot.
Is it something I want to devote my entire life to for the next 2 or 3 years?
Correct. Yeah. And then if
you
have
2 or 3 great ideas per day, which one is worthy of your involvement for the next 2 or 3 years? And
I think that's another relevant point, because for me, the people pleasing side crept into this. These outcomes I thought I wanted, but in fact, it was me wanting to people please, and there's someone else's outcome. So I got trapped a few times in that. And then the fear of failure and the fear of falling short, with our intense feelings and our impulsive, intense feelings and passion, we can get lost in that, and that fear is amplified. So in the end, like, urgency mode is part of the ADHD brain, but we need to overcome that procrastination to get started, and to reduce our options is one way to do it. So Dr. Dodson, thanks again for joining us today. I got so many notes. I got so much stuff to take away from this. This is phenomenal. I know the listeners always love your interviews, and because we're always learning so much. So thanks again for joining us. And where can people find you?
I'm retired now. I'm working. I stopped seeing patients 5 years ago, and I've been working on a book that is very close to actually going to the publisher on the recognition and treatment of ADHD. There's not a book out there on that.
And this is for clinicians, for the proper diagnosis of adult ADHD.
But I am a clinician. All my friends are clinicians, and I know they are. They come home and they're just completely beat.
Yeah,
not going to roll out and pick up a book. How it's actually going to happen is that at Christmas time, 7 or 8 of their patients are going to give them this book, and they'll take the hint. That's how it's going to happen.
Nice. And the way you're able to explain stuff very succinctly and clearly, without getting lost in the clinical diatribe, it's a skill that not a lot of people have. So I commend you on that. And
I'm one of the few people who comes at it from clinical practice. I'm not a researcher. I listen to my patients, and they tell me. I'm just a good listener, and I write it down.
Nice.
So, and that's
keep up the good
really
work.
One of the biggest obstacles to the field of ADHD is that it's all being done by people who are looking at it from the outside.
Right.
You look at our diagnostic criteria, it's for people who are describing what it looks like from the outside, not what it's like on the inside. And that's been something that's really held the field back for a long time.
Yeah, very true. And I think you could say that to a lot of different professions as well. That's a valid statement. So
Yeah.
thank you very much again. And to you, the listener, let's start from the end now. Let's get over this ADHD inertia and let's start from the end. Can you start from the end? How does that change your perspective? And how can we get to our goals quicker and have more fun? So thanks again, Dr. Dodson. And to you, the listeners, thanks again for learning with me. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.